Hello, David. We're going to take a look at your aesthetic and control posting here. So let's just dive right in, share. Now, we start with an overview, taking a look at the overall posting. See that you're sort of attaching everything. You've labeled things fairly well, 1/25th of a second at focal length number one. You got a couple here at 125. I like that you put in the f-stop as well. That kind of gives us an idea of, that you're paying attention to that kind of stuff. A 15th of a second. So all of that's good. You're labeling fairly well. Focal lengths too. It'd be good if we knew the focal lengths. That way you can take note of that. I'll talk about it in a moment, what the difference is on those focal lengths, what you might expect if we see. The how deep, this should be pretty consistent looking images, except for the depth of field. Looks like you've got them. Your exposures are looking pretty consistent, which is good. That means your camera is compensating properly. Not all cameras do that, believe it or not. There's some variation that can sometimes happen with that. Moving into the other focal length, those look fine. A little dark. You get a little bit dark. You can see though at this focal length 35, it looks like your shutter speeds are a little bit different. You got F8, F22, and F22. I'm not sure what's going on there. Oh, I'm sorry. Those were your equivalent exposures. I blew right past the other ones. So yeah, those are fine. These three are fine. Looks like you did the math problem correctly. And then you get into the better. This is where you start to do some imagery that might be pushing some of the aesthetic boundaries to sort of play with maybe getting closer to what your own vision is. I like what you're talking about here, how you're feeling more comfortable with some of the controls and being able to take ownership of your own photography rather than allowing the camera to have presets that work for you. Things like that. You're thinking about how it's photography might be incorporated into your work, that kind of thing. You'll continue to work on your writing and that kind of thing. Writing is an important skill for a visual artist, believe it or not. It's one of those things that we all have to work on. I would recommend the best way to improve your writing is to read. And reading doesn't necessarily mean you have to read. Audible listening to books is helpful too, because you'll hear language. That's helpful as well. So I don't think your writing is bad. I just think, we want to improve always. So let's take a look here. I really appreciate what you're doing here with the dark exposures, your use of shadows, things like this. This gets a little bit dark, I think. Not so much that it couldn't be corrected in a minor way digitally. We're not digitally correcting these things, but they can definitely be corrected there with it. So those are at 125. We know that those are going to be handheld. You're fine with it. When you get into a 15th of a second, which is pretty much what those are, that's when it gets a little bit tricky. But let's just skip over to the half second ones. Because the 125 we can definitely handhold, right? Half second though, you must be leaning on the table here, because there's no way anybody can hold a camera this steady. It's not that steady, but you're holding the camera steady enough that it's telling me you must be supporting the camera in some way, because human beings can't hold the camera that steady at a half a second. And that's fine. You are doing that, but I really would have wanted you to not try to compensate, but to use the movement. You know what I mean? Rather than trying to figure out how to take a sharp photo at a half a second, that's not the exercise. The exercise is how to incorporate this idea that there's going to be movement in the photo, incorporating it into the aesthetic. Go ahead and jump on and look at some of the other solutions that students have had with this movement. They're not trying to keep the camera steady at a half a second. They're just going with the idea that it's going to move. And so they're playing with it. There's nothing wrong with this, but I think if you just accept the idea that this is moving, you're going to be much happier. The images will look much more free. They won't look like you're struggling to keep it steady. I wouldn't have asked you to try to make a perfectly sharp image at a half a second. So I would say that, go ahead and practice that, play around with it. I actually think you might have done that in your, better. Let me see here. Sorry, I'm scribbling through here really quick. Yeah, you did that a little bit down in here where you're playing around with a little bit of the movement where you're zooming in with your lens and stuff. So yeah, you play around with that a little bit more. So the half a second was really not about can you hold it steady at a half a second. It's really more about what can you do with the concept of the image is going to be moving at a half a second. That said, this one is a quite an interesting image. This one's quite an interesting image. The point of view is quite good. You're using the entire picture plane. The exposure works. The darks, the lights, all of that is very good. Excellent image. Let's move into the how deep. This one gets to really just the sort of visualization of depth of field. So you can see here as we continue forward that you're getting either shallow depth of field or long depth of field. Now, you got these a little bit out of order here. Boom, boom, boom. See how it goes from here and it gets more out of focus? Something happened there. It shouldn't get more out of focus in the front. It should be getting more in focus in the front. So somehow these got out of order. Let me see what you've labeled them at. You're saying 6.3. 6.3 is not a full f-stop. We wanted to have started at f8. F8 would have been your first full f-stop. 6.3 is not a full f-stop. So go ahead and delete that from your posting. 8 is your first full f-stop. 6.3 is not. It's important to understand that. That 6.3 is an in-between. That is not a full f-stop. 8, 11. The next one above 8 is 5.6. That's the next full f-stop. So these numbers are, Greek to you at first, but you'll memorize them eventually. If you use this enough, you'll start to memorize those on there. Wow, you get all the way to 32. That's impressive. Nice. That's good. Again, you started at 6.3, just delete those. You don't want to start at 6.3. That's like some weird half that's in between the F8 and 5.6. So we don't really need that, but 32, that's great. That's excellent to be able to work through that. Here, for some reason, you went ahead and did them in reverse, and that's fine. Again, 6.3, we don't need it. That's not necessary. Now, equivalent exposures, what's that about? It's a math problem. It's just a puzzle for you to solve. It's really not as complicated as it sounds. When we describe doing equivalent exposures, it sounds really super difficult, but really it's just, do you understand the concept of the reciprocal relationship of exposure, of intensity over time? As time goes up, intensity can go down. More time, less intensity. More intensity, less time. It's like a scale. And you're just practicing that and visualizing that. This was essentially a math problem, and you either got it right or you didn't get it right. You either got all 3 images correct or you didn't. I see that you did have it listed on each one. You've got the solutions correctly identified here. So you did the math problem correctly. Now, the other part of it is the compositions. Oddly enough, now that we were focusing on the camera controls, a lot of students, you're not the only one, a lot of students kind of let the compositions go a little bit. In other words, they were focusing less on creating dynamic compositional solutions. In other words, they're not looking at the compositions as much. Now, you did a nice job of lighting. Yeah, you're using short lighting most of the time here. That's good. The bones are a little bit scattershot here. You could have maybe spent a little bit more time arranging to create a little bit more of a dynamic or interesting compositions in front of the camera. But that's typical. I mean, that happens. You're focusing more on the camera controls. You're focusing on this other thing. But understand that when you start to work with all these things with photography, and as you build on it, it all starts to come together, and you want it to come together, and it will, just through practice and repetition. It'll become just second nature. All these things won't be stuff you have to think about. you'll just kind of be built into what you have to do. Just like a painter can kind of just squeeze out the amount of paint out of the tubes and mix them together, and they kind of know how much to use. Or someone who's been baking, biscuits for a long time, 30 years, they don't have to measure. They know by look how much flour they need. They just put it in the bowl. Photographers can do that too when they've been using a lot of the same materials over and over again, the same kind of lenses and cameras and stuff. Not that, you have to get there, but it will happen if you continue to practice. So this zoom phenomenon, that's kind of cool. You can do it once, you can do it twice, but then it starts to get a little bit hokey. It's a cool thing though. I'm glad you discovered it. This sort of, take a picture a long exposure and zoom back and forth like that. A little bit goes a long way. You did it. I think this is probably the most effective example of it, since what you're getting almost is this sort of almost panicked feel to the image, as opposed to here where it feels like it's more of this blur feel. Here, there's more of an energy to it, more of an optical trick than a subject trick. Here we can see the image, and so I think it's less effective. Here's much more effective, and then the blue, and then your composition. You got this line going on with the shadows. This one's a much more effective use of that. This one's also pretty good. Again, your quality of light is good. I would have not wanted that light in the shot. You could crop that out if you needed to, just kind of crop this area out, or somehow gotten rid of it, or lowered your camera angle so that's not there. Like this. A reflector would have been really cool right here in the front to reflect a little bit of light back into the scene. That would have helped with this image to bring just a little bit of texture, not detail. We don't need detail in that foreground, but a bit of texture would have really helped make the image feel more complete. I understand what you're going for, this sort of mystery, kind of this sort of ominous feel, and you're capturing it. But I think you need a little bit of more texture in there to get the image just to be just right. Here, again, you're using that zoom technique. I would say that, you do it once and it becomes more of a filter that you're using. Play with it, see what you do, but I think you hit it here. You did a good job with it here. And the other ones are just sort of like, yeah, they're okay. If they were the only ones you did, you'd be like, oh yeah, that's cool. So anyway, a little bit goes a long way when you're using those kinds of techniques there. This is an interesting start to do this kind of overhead scattering of the bones. I think you got started here. And then I don't know if you continued to shoot with this overhead perspective and in arranging the bones in this way. There's a lot of potential in this. I think it looks like you just kind of got started with this concept and maybe didn't quite go far enough or take it as far as it could be. So that's what I have. I think overall you did a pretty good job with this. We had a few things that I think were a little bit off. For instance, the half-second stuff, it looked like you were trying to hold the camera steady instead of just kind of taking it with it. That kind of thing. A few of your exposures were a little dark, but I like that you're taking chances. That's a good thing. I like that you're experimenting with color in the better. That's all working fairly well. And in the end, technically, it looks like you did the projects for the most part pretty well. So, excuse me, pretty well. So I hope you have fun on location this week, and we will see you afterward. All right. Bye-bye now.